This week, I'm delighted to welcome author, ethical business advisor, and founder of Cotswold Fayre, Paul Hargreaves, to the show. From Oxford University to becoming a lorry driver, and then starting a trust to improve the lives of underprivileged inner city kids. We find out how injustice and rebellion led to Paul's success. Good morning. First of all, I have to say that thank you very much for agreeing to do this. Not only thanking you for agreeing to do this, but you are my first person. So if this podcast ever becomes famous, you'll be able to say I was the first person that I appeared on it. So we've known each other for a very, very long time, Paul. So again, thank you very much. Hopefully within this hour, you're going to be giving us all some words of wisdom. And the theme, I thought what would be really interesting is to do a podcast looking at success is not normal.
Okay.
I tend to find a lot of people think that being an entrepreneur is an easy thing, but actually it's very, very, very tough. And I want to get people like you in to come in and really tell them really what it's like. So my first question after that long rambling intro is I like to go right back to the beginning of your story. Tell me a bit about your childhood.
So, well, I grew up in Manchester, South Manchester. Both my parents were doctors. My dad was a surgeon. My mum was an anaesthetist, although they never, ever worked together. Apparently that's not meant to do that, apparently. So, yeah, so I had a privileged upbringing in that respect, which actually has kind of fed into where I've gone since. And some of this I've only kind of realised this more recently. But I've always had a strong sense of injustice. So where I lived in...
But before we go into that, because I'm just so interested, so you have a mom and dad who are what I call left-brainers. And to be a entrepreneur, you need to be a bit of a right brainer. You know, you need to challenge convention, whereas something like your mom and dad doing, you've got to follow systems and rules, and it's all very, very evidence-based.
Yeah.
The thing about being entrepreneurial is that, well, you don't have the evidence, you have to have your gut to go with, you know, what you feel.
Yeah.
How do you acquire that sort of ability, being brought up in that sort of household?
Oh, I think I was probably born with it because I always knew I wasn't really like my mum and dad, and I was quite rebellious, to be honest with you. I didn't want to follow convention. They were very convention-driven, as you say, not only in their jobs, but also in their view of success. So they were both from fairly working class families. They were the first ones in their families to go to university. They put a lot of value in material possessions, and I always had a sense that was a bit empty. So that probably drove me later on in life to end up in the charitable world.
And you see, one of the things you've just hit on, which I absolutely fundamentally agree is an essential tool, is that you were rebellious. I just think that I'm very, very rebellious as a person, because you've got to have a real confidence in self to rebel against everything else around you that's telling you something else.
Yeah, I always rebelled probably just over the rules, so I didn't get into trouble that much, but I was always fighting against authority. I was a terrible, I hated authority. I was naughty at school.
You see, we are so similar. You see, we come across as very, very different people. But you just touched on an essential thing that we both shared, which I was very, very rebellious. Yeah. But it would be probably expected of me to be rebellious. But as you're explaining you being rebellious, I find that quite interesting.
And I was also quite proud of it. The report I was most pleased with, my parents were least pleased with, which was an English report, and it said, made some good contributions when present.
And so where did that rebellious streak come from, do you think?
I don't know. It's difficult to say. I was the oldest child. I think sometimes they have meant to toe the line a bit more than the younger ones. I got a younger brother and sister.
And what did they do? Have they gone into the entrepreneurial world, or have they followed suit in terms
My brother has, yes. My sister, not so much. But I was always having to break the ground for them. So in my view, maybe totally wrong, but I felt like I paved the way for them to have a much easier time of it.
And I'm the eldest. Well, I'm the eldest boy in my family, and again, the sort of expectation that your parents have of you when the oldest is that they want. It's all done in great intention.
Yeah.
They want you to succeed. They want life to be much easier for you.
Yeah.
So it must be really difficult for them to then find out they've got us.
Yeah, they wanted a perfect model, didn't they? Model Mark 1, version 1 was me.
Exactly. So you're a bit of a rebellious child, and you're brought up in Manchester. And tell me about what were you like at school? Did you continue that rebellious streak at school?
Well, to some degree, like I said, I probably stayed just within the rules, but I was always the one kind of provoking a bit of naughtiness in the class, maybe trying to get other people to do the stuff rather than me being the one that got into
you're
trouble.
the one that's sort of getting somebody else to go and get in trouble whilst you're there, sort of rubbing your hands.
Yeah.
That's quite interesting.
So yeah, I remember one classroom we actually before the lesson started, we actually turned the whole classroom round. So when the teacher came in, rather than coming at the front, he was actually coming in the back, and everyone was facing away from him.
No, that's very creative.
Yeah. Well, that was my idea, but other people have implemented it.
Well, you see, so the whole sort of entrepreneur mindset you could see starting very early days, challenging the systems. How did the teachers react to that, by the way?
Well, it was very difficult to punish any one person in that set because everyone had been involved. So he just basically made us turn the classroom back again, started the lesson 10 minutes
But
late.
how did you feel about being able to get the whole...
Pretty pleased, actually.
It
was my early leadership.
It is. So there you are. So, it's great leadership skills. You're getting people to do things where they may end up in trouble. And that is all. These little signs are indications that you're not normal.
Yeah, I haven't actually thought about it this way before. But now you mention it, yes.
Yeah, and this is what the interesting thing about this podcast is that trying to plot where the abnormality comes from. We've already seen that you're a bit rebellious. You're leading people to do things, just to see how that would be. So what type of school did you go to?
It was a grammar school, yeah.
So you were bright enough to get into grammar school?
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I was. Well, let's say bright. I've got a really good memory, so I'm very good at remembering facts. I'm not that great on logic and working things out, but I can remember a lot. Therefore, with our probably I would say flawed education system, if you got a good memory, you do okay in exams.
Okay, because I failed my 11 plus, as they were called in those days, and I then went up in secondary modern school, and they didn't really expect much from people who went to secondary modern. So what is really interesting, you just said, is that, well, you had a good memory, and that memory then enabled you just to regurgitate information pretty quickly. But you didn't feel as though you sort of be able to do anything with that information.
No,
besides.
I think sometimes I didn't really have a clue what I was regurgitating. I just learnt how to regurgitate in the form they wanted me to.
So this theory then about left brain and right brain, so it sounds as though you're more of a right brain, far more creative.
Yeah, definitely. I did a science degree, zoology, but...
This is where it starts getting really confusing. So you're a right brainer, you're a bit of a rebel, and then you go and do all the traditional things like a science degree.
Well,
why did you choose to do a science degree?
I wish I hadn't. Now I'm probably more suited to the arts, but the degree I did was more philosophical. Richard Dawkins, Selfish Gene guy, was one of my tutors. It was actually less science and more philosophy actually when I got there to do it. But pressure from the school was very science orientated. Probably pressure from my parents, unconsciously. So I wasn't rebellious enough not to do that.
You didn't want to go out on a limb. So you went to a grammar school, and you said university. Where did you go to university?
I went to Oxford.
Well, that's pretty remarkable. How did you manage to get in there? So you're a bit of a rebel,
Well, again, good memory. I mean, I knew I was always good at spotting which questions were going to come up in exams, and it was all about Richard Dawkins and the Selfish Gene. And guess what? The exam came round. Half of it was about that book. So I read that book 4 times, memorised it, and came up with the right answers
at the time. So your parents must have been seriously well pleased getting into when you got into Oxford.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, only to be disappointed a few years later. But
so, tell me, when you said they were disappointed, what you?
I worked. I didn't really know. I had no sense of what I wanted to do with my life. So I did the degree. Actually, drove a lorry. straight after my degree, which they weren't very pleased
But before
about.
that, what was it like being in Oxford? I mean, I'm fascinated by this because I never went to university. So you'd imagine going to Oxford is where students are very privileged. I mean, how did you find that?
It's not as bad as people think in that there was a lot of normal. My college actually had more people from the north than the south. But
Which was your college?
Brasenose.
Okay, not that I know.
But I was there with David Cameron, Boris Johnson were there. They only really talked to people like them. They didn't talk to what I would say normal people like me. So,
oh, right. So you used to see those guys
oh
around
yeah,
then?
but David Cameron was actually at Brasenose. I think he was the year below me. So,
And so, all this Bullington Club and all that, did you see them going around doing that
I
sort of
did.
stuff?
Yeah, I would obviously didn't get invited to join, and I wouldn't have joined if I had. But yeah, you saw them prancing around Oxford. Yeah.
So there was the privileged lot, and then so what would you have been regarded as a sort of
a normal kind of northern boy, probably, yeah.
And what did you all think about these posh lot?
Well, we thought they were distant and privileged and not in the real world, and probably my view hasn't changed since.
Oh, right. So you went to Oxford. You go into this sort of world. Your parents are really proud of you, and then you end up leaving university, and then you drive a lorry. What the hell happened
mainly
there?
because I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I had to do something to pay the rent. I had a rented house at the time.
I'm just thinking from your parents' point of view. So you leave Oxford. What did you get? What is it 2-1?
2-1, yeah.
2-1, and then you go back home and you drive.
I didn't go back home. I didn't ever go back home after university. Let's not go into that. But yeah, I was playing for time to some degree. I mean, again, looking back in time, it was 6 months, gave me thinking time, and actually, you get treated like crap as a lorry driver at the back door of supermarkets and things like that. And actually, that was really good for me, I think, after being at Oxford.
One of the things I think, one of the essential tools as well for being an entrepreneur is that you need to go through a period of what I call the wilderness years, when what you described as going through crap, basically, really struggling, because that, in a sense, is your great test about actually, are you going to chicken out and go and have a normal life, or you're going to have the courage to go and do something that you really want to do. Yeah,
and I've been through a few more wildernesses since.
Well, tell me about the wildernesses, yes, because these things are essential learnings for people, you see.
Okay, so I did a sales job for 3 years. So I learned how to sell. After the lorry driving, I've only been employed for 3 years of my life, and that was 3 years selling. Mm-hmm. I was quite good at talking, and I could generally persuade anyone to buy anything. So
what were you selling?
I sold office furniture for a year, and then coffee and tea, drinks machines for a couple of years. So I was B2B selling.
So why were you good at it? What is the essential tools about being good at selling?
I think if I was to look back, I've never done anything with my zoology degree, but one thing the university gave me was confidence. I was probably not that confident when I went there. I was fairly confident when I came out. I was always the captain of the sports teams, the rowing, football team. I came out with confidence.
What I'm trying to picture is that there seems to be the leader in you is coming out here, being a captain, being all that. So what is it about you that people feel confident to allow you to lead them?
Apart from being bossy,
nothing about you comes across as being bossy. If you take me, I'm quite intimidating. You're not.
No, I don't know. You'd probably have to ask the people that work for us. But I'm fairly determined of where I want to get to. But I probably help people get there rather than order them to get there, if that makes any sense. So, I'm being inspiring is one of my qualities now, I would say, and maybe I always was to some degree. So people have always wanted to follow me in various different ways.
So you're confident in selling, and what is the art of selling?
Building relationship, really, isn't it? So
it sounds easy, but it's a lot more difficult.
Yeah, well, listening rather than talking. I mean, most the bad salespeople talk too much and don't listen enough. So if you listen to the customer's needs, hopefully you've got a solution that fits the needs, and it's not really that difficult.
So you then discovered that selling was a skill that you had.
Yeah, and I think it's obviously a great skill for anyone starting a business to be able to sell, because without sales you won't have a business. So when I did start the business, I was the salesperson. Went out in my car with samples, and I generally, unless I got products into 4 new shops a day, I didn't come home.
So let me go back then. So you started off, you left your lorry driving job. You then started selling office furniture.
Yeah.
So you're then starting to discover that you have a talent for this sort of stuff. Then what happened after that?
So I did that for 3 years, and then really what I really wanted to do was I was living in the inner city in southeast London. I wanted to make more of a difference to the people's lives who live there.
Okay, right. That's why I wanted to ask this question. That type of idea doesn't just happen. What is it that happened in your life to suddenly be considerate and concerned about what's happening in other people's lives?
Well, this comes back to the injustice thing I mentioned right at the beginning. So we lived in quite a big house, but it was right on the edge of at the time, I think it was the largest council estate in Europe, in Wythenshawe. So I always had this sense of it was unfair that we had quite a lot, and a lot of people down the road didn't have much. I didn't like that as a person. Who knows where that came from? I don't really know.
So let me go back, because I want to try and analyse this then, because so you're living on the edge of a council estate in a big house. Why did your parents live there? Why?
Well, it was quite a nice area, and it was probably 2/3 of a mile to the council estate. But we went to the middle of Manchester through there, so it was. You were passing quite a lot of poverty every time you went out in the car, basically. But the area we actually lived in had other nice houses nearby. But
and then you see what I'm trying to think of then is that was it something that concerned your parents or
no, very much not, which really annoyed me. So they were quite proud of achieving what they've achieved, and didn't seem to have a lot of compassion for people who weren't in such a good position as they were.
So again, what's coming up here is the theme of being an outsider. So to hold an idea which is outside your family, again, is quite courageous. And so this theme of success is not normal. There's, you don't have any of the normal anchors that people have in their lives, because you're going against everything that your parents' ideal is.
Yeah.
To have a strong sense. And so it then gives you a sense of belonging, then, would you say, by identifying with something that
I guess so. I mean, again, I haven't thought about it that way, but surely a lot of people rebel against their parents' background.
No, they don't.
Don't they?
No. The reason we're sitting having this sort of chat here is because we're not normal.
No, I guess I also know quite a few other entrepreneurs, and they're also not normal, so that might be why.
Yeah, I think so. We're not normal, and I think part of this podcast is to celebrate that abnormality, and also for people to understand, in order to be entrepreneurial, you've got to identify where does the abnormalities come about, because everything, in a sense, these experiences we're talking about is training you to do what you're doing. You've got to be comfortable, not being normal, comfortable having a view that is opposed to everybody else, because that's what you've got to do when you're starting off doing your thing, really.
Yeah, I wish I'd known this earlier, though.
Well, you see, this is hopefully going to help. It's going to help other people trying to identify the abnormalities, and then it's looking back. You can see where the dots are all joined up, really. So these things.
Yeah, and that's something I've very much done in the last few years. Is kind of realised all the the great things and the awful things I've been through has helped me the person I am today, and has a unique contribution, as you do, as everyone watching does. Yeah. And the fact it's yes, of course we all know we're unique, but actually, do you really know that you have a unique thing to offer the world?
Yeah,
because of our background, good and bad.
And that's why the background is quite interesting. So for me, joining up the dots, you leave university, you never go back home, because by that time I presume you sort of decide that type of environment is not for you. Is that right?
Yeah, a lot of my friends were in the south of England at that point, and I probably wanted rather be with them than my parents. And then you then become a salesman, and again, that's pretty. Anybody in sales is pretty courageous. And then there is a strong identification with outsiders. Yes,
so
that then 12 years of working in the inner city with various.
Okay, but I want to break it down,
yeah.
you see, because you're quite flippant about these things, but I like to break it down because from your background and for your privilege to decide for that to become your single most important purpose is a big deal. So it's almost religious in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, well, there was a religious element to it at the time. Yeah.
Well, tell me about that then.
Well, I've always believed in a God of compassion, and I get frustrated with actual religion because it doesn't seem to impact the world very much. So I wouldn't use the term religious about me now, but I have a faith, but I have a faith that results in action and isn't just about sitting in buildings singing songs, a lot of which is a waste of time. So, yeah, if anyone claims to have a faith, then they should be doing something to reverse all the bad stuff in the world. So that's what I was doing.
And so what I'm interested in is that so in order to have that purpose, because everything about you is purpose driven, it's usually a reaction to something. What does that happen in your own purpose, in your own personal life, to then realize that you needed a clear purpose in order to give your life meaning?
It's probably back to what I said earlier with the futility of modernism and materialism and what's the point of all that. I've never put a great store on having huge amounts of possessions and stuff like that. I think probably I've always sensed there's got to be more to life than this. Hence the purpose that's, like you said, has pretty much run through my whole life.
So you decide you're good at selling. You then identify that actually what you want to do is to help the people who are less better off than you. Tell me about that. How do you go about that?
So, well, we were working in a place.
Who's we?
A group of friends from university, actually. So some of the people that I wanted to be with, rather than going back north. So we formed a group that set up a trust and managed to get a few pennies in that way.
You see, this is where I've got to. I find it quite challenging. The way you say it is as though it's a normal thing to do. How old would you have been then?
Well, normal is what we only know and what we've done ourselves. So everything seems normal to me.
But it's not. You see. So how old are you then? Would you say when you?
Well, I left university at 20 or so, probably 24, 25.
So you're 24. I've got children with 24, 25. They're vain little sods, basically. The idea that they're going to set up a trust to help other people. Most young people wouldn't even. That wouldn't.
Well, I didn't know. I knew someone who knew, and one of the team knew how to do it. So,
even forget whether it's a trust or not. But the idea that actually you're not going to be like normal 25-year-olds, which are so self-centered that actually what you want to do is that you want to help people. That ain't normal.
No, I guess not. But it is to me. I would see it as not normal to not want to help people.
Yeah. That's because you're exceptional. But I'm speaking on behalf of most people. That ain't normal. So you decide. So you see, some people, for example, I could understand something traumatic has happened in their lives. And as a way of turning around their lives, they then actually direct their energies into something like that.
Yes, I've seen that. Yeah.
So did that happen in your case?
No, not at all.
Okay, so you weren't a drug addict or something pretty horrendous to say, right, I'm going to turn my life around. This basically was a desire to do good.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm not exactly sure where that came from, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's see if we could find out more about this then. So you decided that you're going to set up some sort of fund, and to do what?
Well, just imagine this was the early 90s. Thatcherism had left the inner cities pretty deprived. Huge amount. I mean, it's not changed that much since. Slightly better, I guess. But a lot of drug addiction, high numbers of children who were what we'd now say are below the poverty line, just huge amounts of need and people aimlessly wandering around there and having no purpose. So I guess we were trying to give them a sense of
And how would you give them? I tell you what I'm finding interesting about your story at the moment, because I would have been the very child you would have been trying to help, because I was from the inner cities, Small Heath in Birmingham, extremely deprived. I mean, luckily I was not into drugs or any alcoholism, and that's because my parents, we were brought up in the church, but it was deprivation and disappointment and a lack of opportunity. So that's why it's quite interesting for me that people like you were trying to make a difference. And how were you trying to make that difference?
The whole of life pushes down on people a lot. There was a huge lack of joy, lack of happiness. We did a lot with kids, actually. So we ran a Saturday children's church, which was basically like Saturday TV, lots of slapstick. And for those kids, that was probably the highlight of their week, to come and have some fun away from their difficult family background. The parents weren't motivated enough to get them there, so we literally had to walk out, knock on doors, pick them up, bring them back to us, and then take them home again at the end. So just offering a little kind of chink of light into what was pretty grim life for many of these kids.
So you then go around and you're helping these young people, or bring a bit of joy, really, because at the end of the day, I'm a great believer that you could only offer opportunity, then it's down to the individual to what they make of that sort of opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you do that, then what? Tell me more about your story.
So, I was doing that with various different people for, I think, 12 years in total, having kids of my own by this point.
Well, hold on. Well, you keep jumping at the important pieces of the information. So, you said you talk about having kids. So I presume that you got a wife. Tell me about how you met her and how did that come about.
I met her, but actually while I was at university. She wasn't there, but I met her during a summer holiday.
And what's her
project.
background?
So, she was doing an arts degree at the time.
She's a right brainer then.
Yes. I'm not married to her anymore, by the way.
You're not married to her anymore. I'm quite interested.
Come on to that later.
So you married to her. Art degree. What did she end up doing then?
Occupational therapy is what she ended up doing.
Did she? Yeah. How do you go from art to occupational therapy?
Well, there is a connection, isn't there? Because they in some parts of occupational therapy, they use the arts to help fine motor skills and stuff like that.
And did you get married straight after university?
Fairly soon, yeah.
Fairly soon. So how old were you then?
I was actually only 21, I think.
And so what's the learning?
Probably got married too young.
And why do you? And then why do you? Because one of the things I love, and a very important thing for anybody who think they're entrepreneurial, failure is a great teacher.
Yeah, and the marriage lasted nearly 20 years. And
did it? Well, it took a long time to fail then.
Exactly, but you're right. My DNA is I never fail. So when that marriage did fail, all those years later, that was a massive impact for me.
So that was your big teacher.
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
Because one of the things I always advocate, the only way to measure whether you're living your life to the full is by the number of mistakes that you make. So if you look back over the last 6 months and 12 months and you haven't failed, that is an indication that you're not pushing yourself hard enough.
Absolutely agree with that. So I almost lost the business at one point in 2014, which was not a failure, but very, very close to one. We've had a number of failed projects since, but too right. If you're not failing, then you're not taking enough risks.
So before we go on to that, so you got married, and so you probably 20 years is a long time. Why did you stay together that length of time? Is it because you were frightened of failing? Do you think you just
in the latter years, probably yes. But yeah, we would, in terms of she was doing the stuff I was doing in London as well, and that kind of joint purpose, if you like, kept us together. But on reflection, we probably weren't that suited. And if you really want to go deeper, I guess my parents were very much put a lot of store on success and achieving things, and weren't actually that great emotionally at loving unconditionally. So love was conditional on getting good exam results or getting a good job or whatever. So I think I was needy of that emotional connection, which is probably why I got married. I would now say too young, and that's been one of the things that's changed significantly in more recent years.
And I suppose that's what I think is that failed relationships are the greatest gifts to us in terms of if we're prepared to learn the lessons that they're teaching us about ourselves.
Yep.
It then helps us to go on to the next level of our sort of personal sort of development.
Yeah, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now without that failure, without the almost business failure. And then I was also got malaria at one point, which was another, I was suddenly realised I wasn't invincible anymore. And, I know you've had a health thing as well, which has probably done the same for you. So, yeah.
But again, I want to go into a bit more details with this. So did you have any children then when you got married, your first marriage?
Yeah, I've got 4 children.
You got 4 children. And then, so you had that. So when did you start the business? Your business now then. So we've got to the stage where you're helping people. Then when did you start?
Yeah, so I kind of started the business alongside that charity world stuff, mainly to put food on the table, to be honest. The money from the trust had dried up, so I had to do something to earn a few quid.
But how do you go from selling office furniture to what you're doing now? How did you make that leap?
Well, I think all selling is pretty much the same, isn't it? If you can talk to people, build relationship, we can sell them what you're selling. So put a few food products in the back of the car from the Cotswolds.
So where did you get that idea from again? Because again, I'm always interested in these moments where you decide, actually, I'm going to go from this to doing food.
My ex-in-laws, if that's the right term, were making meringues, Cotswold meringues, and then through them I met 1 or 2 other Cotswold producers, and I thought, well, these products will sell well in delis in London, surely. So that's when I put them in the car and took them round to shops, and sure enough, they love them.
I tried going into selling to delis. It's bloody hard work.
Yes, it is. It probably was a bit easier in those days because there was far, far less artisan food products around than there are now. So me turning up on the door was probably a bit more of an unusual event. Now I would imagine they get absolutely besieged.
Get away,
people,
not interested. Send in the catalogue.
But at the time, it was probably a bit of a novelty. And they most of what was in those shops at the time actually was Italian, Greek. There wasn't very much British artisan food at the time. So, yeah, I mean, I started at a good time, late 90s. There was suddenly more interest in British food again. The TV chefs were doing stuff on TV and building awareness of good British food. So, yeah, it was a good time to start a food business.
So you were going around to the delis, selling stuff into these delis. Then what?
It got to the point where, I went on holiday for 2 weeks and came. Do you remember the old answering machine tapes?
Oh, yes,
back in the day?
Yeah.
Came back and the tape was full. And it was all full of initially orders and then people ringing, what's going on? Where's my order? Whoops, okay, maybe I shouldn't have gone on holiday and just left the phone.
That's one of the things I've always learned. Even to this day, I'm terrified of going away on holiday. So what happened?
Well, that was a reminder. Actually, maybe this needs to be either a stop or it needs to be a proper business and employ people who might answer the phone when I'm not there. So that's what I did in 1999. I happened to run across another guy who was keen, just come back from Africa actually. He was keen to start a business, also come from the charitable background and wanted to have a business that was making some kind of positive difference in the world. So I was well aligned with him and we started in 1999.
Mm. And so you and him got together and then how do you go from you just going individually to then employing people and building up one?
So the great thing about him was he loved all the stuff I didn't like. So all I really liked was the buying and the selling, and he liked all the admin, the data, computers, all the boring bits that I would have been no good at. He was happy to do and left me to do the more interesting bits, which was the people side of it and the buying and the selling. So that's what we did.
Well, you just said something else which is quite important because a lot of partnerships actually don't work. And that's because they don't actually balance each other.
Yeah, and a lot of good businesses are partnerships which do work as well, don't they? Ours was short-lived because after 2 years, as with many startups, we weren't making a penny, and he was finding the pressure of that probably a bit more difficult than me. So he left.
And that's really interesting what you've just said about pressure, because actually the testament about being an entrepreneur is how do you deal with pressure? Why did he not deal with it and you were able to?
See, quite a few times when I was doing the charity stuff, I literally had no money. Sometimes not enough to pay the mortgage, and then suddenly, something would happen, and there's suddenly be some money there. So I think I was probably more used to him than living on very little at that point.
I want to analyse that bit as well, because being an entrepreneur, that is a critical bit. Because I've been in a situation where you don't know where the money's going to come to pay the mortgage, you don't know where things are going to happen.
Yeah.
And the only way you get through that is being comfortable with uncertainty.
Yes, which is really important.
Which is really, will you agree? I just think the problem is that what your business partner demonstrated was that he needed more certainty. And again, in terms of us being abnormal, we're able to deal with uncertainty.
Yes, I don't hold it against him. He had young kids, and
but so
totally
did you. So that's what is interesting. So
Mm.
it's a bit like, I think that is the test. It's about actually when people run for cover, because they think there's such a thing as certainty, but the only thing I believe that's certain in life is uncertainty.
Yeah.
And it's how do you live? So there's got to be some inner core with you, whether that's self-belief, to be able to live with uncertainty.
Yeah, well, it probably comes down to that risk-taking thing again, doesn't it? And being prepared to, success is just around the corner for me, always, even when things aren't good. I'm always thinking it will be good soon. I think some people may not have such a positive spin on things
and the positive mindset. So it's really a question. So again, you were armed with that from when you were back at school. There was something about you that actually prepared and developed that you were being a risk taker.
Yeah.
When you got those kids to turn around the bloody because you didn't know what the outcome was. Do you know what I mean?
No, and the consequences could have been worse than they were.
Exactly. And so that's when I like to sort of link these things. So you had already developed. So it's about actually really conditioned to live with risk, because you've been doing it ever since you were a kid, basically.
Yeah, and some of those situations in southeast London were full of risk. I mean, I've been approached with people with knives and been offered guns and stuff like that. Isn't, again, not normal, but it's just one of those things that has happened to me, and I quite often get into bizarre situations when I'm in other countries and actually think it's normal and okay. My wife doesn't probably agree with that it is, but
you probably seem a bit. I think you're a bit more abnormal than I am. I don't know whether I'd be going to.
She did. This is my second wife, Nicola. She did joke to people in the office one day that when the first holiday she organised, which was a few years ago, she said it was the first holiday that we'd been on where she hadn't had to pack a bulletproof vest.
Is it?
It's not true, but that's what she felt like.
It gives you the sentiment about you. So So all of this sort of stuff that you sort of take as just a general, wow, that's normal, ain't. It's all pretty remarkable. So it's a bit. In another world, you could have been a war correspondent or something. Where you're sort of, you're running towards danger.
Yeah, I don't have that sense of danger. I don't know what
I suppose
is, but
a war correspondent wouldn't.
No,
you know what I mean?
No.
They would see all those sort of qualities as abnormal.
I go to Kenya quite a lot, as you know, and quite often end up in hairy situations. I'm not really frightened. I'm always. There's got to be a way out of this. Yeah. So again,
I'm so glad you're my first podcast, because everything about you is a real indication about how success is not sort of normal, because you see it as very, very normal, but it isn't. And I'm somebody who also sees themselves as not being normal, but you're a bit more abnormal than I am, which is quite interesting. So you then actually decide to be plugging away at this business.
Yep.
And then you obviously then sort of built it over time. So were you still married at this time then, or what? When did...
That's, in the early years. So, yes, I had the business partner for 2 years. He left. We had, we initially tried to do good. We had an ex-prisoner, ex-drug addict, ex-recovering drug addict, recovering alcoholic. So of our first 5 people, there were 3 people who were probably unemployable to most businesses.
And then what happened to those people? So those people,
one of them, one out of 3 worked. Actually, he was with the business for years, and then got married, had kids of his own. Actually,
I think that's the beauty. Really, is about actually giving the opportunity, but also how do you deal with the failures? Because there's a massive
I now would say that was too much too soon. I think you need a business that has a reasonably solid financial base before you try and do too much. And 60% is always too much. I think 60% of people there who probably needed more time and care, and because they were coming from a troubled background. I mean, Timpson's take on 10% of prisoners in their business. That's probably a more realistic percentage. So, so he left me holding the baby. That also forced me to move out of London because we had people working for me then in Reading. And I'd lost my way, I would say, probably in terms of the purpose for about 8 years. Really just focusing on the normal, boring startup problems, not having enough money to pay the wages, and had to spend some time just building the business without trying to change the world for better. Yeah, exactly. And then in 2011, we were doing pretty well, making profit, and that's when I got involved in this project in Kenya, just because I knew of it. I knew we could help there. Went over there with my daughter, and we're still involved in that to this day.
So what I'm trying to think about is that there is something about you that doesn't just want things to be normal. Do you know what I mean? So you're running a business, but that's not feeding your soul.
No.
The thing that feeds your soul is some form of desperation that you could try and help and give opportunities.
Yeah, I like that expression, feeding my soul, because I would just get bored with normal business stuff. I mean, don't get me wrong, as a entrepreneur, if we're going to use that word, you need people in the business who can do what are the boring stuff that I talked about before. But yes, I would absolutely get bored and would give up.
So the business allows you to feed your soul. Without the business, you wouldn't be able to feed your soul.
Yes, and the more successful we've become as a business, and this is why profit has to be part of the business, people, planet, profit. The more profit we make, the more we can do, and the more positive change we can make. So absolutely, profit is part of it. But if it was just profit, then I wouldn't be interested.
Okay. So with your business then, so you're developing that business, you're employing people, and you said there were a couple of times when you nearly went bust. Tell me about those times.
So the big one was in 2014. We put in a warehouse management system. Won't bore you with the details, but it was basically getting rid of the paper in the warehouse. So the computer knows where everything is, and everything is on guns. People get taken to pick orders by the gun, not by a piece of paper. The implementation went wrong. Customers were getting less than half of what they'd actually ordered, despite all the stuff being in the warehouse, because the computer said no. And we had customers leaving us, suppliers leaving us. And then in the end, we had about nearly 50 people working for us at that point. About half of them also left because it was a terrible, terrible place to be. And I would now say we were 4 or 5 weeks away from disappearing off the face of the planet, which was not good for the business, clearly, but I think it was also terrible for me, because back to that sense of failure, I'd never really failed. The marriage had broken up by then. But in terms of business, I hadn't really ever failed on a big level before. And facing that failure and facing a future without a business, and what it's like, probably my identity was probably too much in a business leader, CEO, whatever you want to call it, and not enough identity in actually me as a person. And again, looking back in time, that's what I was going through at the time. So
the great learnings from this then is this, because you talk about the systems failure, but actually businesses get into that stage, nothing about the systems. It's also what was culturally happening within the business.
So culturally, I had a lot of the wrong people there. That was why the systems failed, because they weren't good enough for what they were doing. And really interesting, I mean, it was awful. It's terrible. You know, I generally sleep really, really well. I wasn't sleeping at all. What the interesting that happened, and the reason now I think it was the best thing that ever happened, was all those wrong people actually left, mainly of their own volition. They just left the business because it wasn't a good place to be.
And why were they the wrong people?
We had started doing what we were doing in Africa about 3 years before that, and around half the people in the business were really into that, and they loved what we're doing. They were, you know, a lot of them started sponsoring children. They were pleased to be part of a business that was doing some good out in the world. The other half probably thought, well, why are they giving money to Africa? I'd rather have a higher wage increase or something like that. So it was those people that left, and left me with the good people.
So this is what I'm trying to understand, really, because any entrepreneurial business, what you need is people who believe the dream, and they're prepared to, in a sense, not want to be conventional.
Yeah.
So how did you end up getting those people? Is it because you started to bring in what I call conventional systems that was actually employing people to do a job rather than people who are joining the faith?
Yeah, I think we'd probably, the biggest mistake I made was recruiting people because of what they could do rather than because of their character. I think now we only really recruit on character.
That is so true, actually.
Well, we can always teach people to do stuff.
Exactly. I think
but
the
you
biggest
can't change someone, can you?
The biggest mistake I've ever made is where people, they look at a CV, they say, well, they've got that education, they've got this experience, they could do the job. But it ain't. It's about personality and character.
Yeah.
And it's about how far are people prepared to go, because that tells you whether they've got the right sort of mindset.
Yeah, and I'm not saying we don't make mistakes on recruitment, we still do, but we've got a lot more people there who are there for the right reasons now than we ever had before.
So that would have been a difficult time for you. But again, you're used to living on the edge. And I'm wondering whether part of subconsciously or the universe was pushing you right to the edge of a situation where you could actually test yourself to actually survive it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the change that's happened in me since that time wouldn't have happened unless I got to that kind of rock bottom feeling, for sure. I would say, you know, if I'm talking to other businesses or conferences, that's the point. I would say Cotswold Fayre Mark II started, Paul Hargreaves Mark II started at that very bottom of the trough in 2014.
And what was the learning about you? What did you discover about yourself?
Not having my identity in what I was doing and learning to be more, if you like.
What does that actually mean, not having the identity? So, for example, with my business, the black farmer is me. You know, it is everything to do with me. So I'm quite interested to explore that a bit further.
Yeah, but from the questions you're asking, I can tell that for you, your reason for living is a lot more than just being the black farmer, isn't it?
Exactly.
And same for me. I was probably just living to be a business success, rather than actually living the life that Paul Hargreaves is meant to live. And yeah, that process is obviously ongoing, isn't it?
Exactly. It's really interesting because that's a really good point, because, my reason for living is to find out what lays under the surface. Yeah. I'm far more interested in that than being a successful businessman. Yeah. That means nothing for me, basically.
My main driver is reversing injustice, which is what I was dabbling around in at the early years of the business, went away from it, and now probably we're doing a lot more on that front. So my purpose as a person is a lot more aligned to what the business is doing than it ever was before.
So the business is an enabler for your purpose, rather than being the be end and all.
Yeah, and if it isn't, if for anyone listening, that's when you're going to get into trouble.
Exactly. And so I'm sort of this person that can never go for a job that's going to earn tons of money. There's no purpose behind it. No. So the job enables you to achieve this sort of purpose.
And the key for us is getting other people who have the same view on life as well. So they're, a lot of people join us because of the exciting things we're doing on climate and some of the exciting things we're doing with food banks and this project in Africa. That's sure, they need to earn money, of course they do, but they also want to go to work for other reasons as well.
Okay, so you have Paul Mark II, and then you also have Mark II and getting married again. Tell me about your is it your present wife?
Yeah, so yes, and it was it was exactly the same time.
Was it?
End of 2014. So at the time when the business was falling apart, I was buying a house to live in with her. Nicola lived in the north, moved down to the south. And getting ready for the wedding was all the same time.
Look, the women are going to listen to this, going to want a bit of romance. How did you meet? Don't just how did you meet each other?
Well, I met her at her first interview, and she came for a job.
She came for a job.
Yes.
And so, what was it about her then that you felt was a sort of connection?
I definitely did feel that. It took 2 years for anything romantic to happen, and then just gradually it became very clear to me that was the right thing to do.
And how has she then helped you grow? Because I think key people in your lives are there to help you grow and find out more about yourself.
Yeah, I think absolutely that contentment in our personal lives probably helps me take more risks actually in the business world. And she's still works for the business. We're very happy, and my happiest years in business have coincided with my happiest personal years, and I don't think that's a coincidence.
And that's really interesting, you see, because you're saying that if you feel that if things personally are secure, that then enables you to be far more pushing ahead and not being frightened of risk. I would agree 100%.
Yeah.
What you don't want to be doing is worrying about your relationship.
No.
You don't want another bloody pressure.
No.
You want to know that.
No, I'm sure there are exceptions to that, but it must follow more often than not, I would have thought, yeah.
Okay. So how long have you been married now, second time around?
2014 to now, so what's that? It's 8 years.
Okay. And so you're that, and then after that time where you nearly went under, when was the last time that things were a bit tough for you?
Well, we had, interesting enough, so we discovered B Corp in 2015, which is a great building block for how we've progressed since. And then really, really interestingly, 5 years later, almost a replication of 2014 again. So this time we were moving warehouse mainly to reduce our carbon impact. But again, pretty much everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. But by this time, 5 years later, we had a lot of the right people there, a lot more purpose in the business. They were going to work not just to make money, they were making a difference. And despite it being a horrible time, there was definitely lots of tears from me and other people. We got through that time, and this was just before COVID, so this was August 2019. Horrible 3 months. Again, lots of complaints from customers. No one left. Everyone pulled together. And for us, it was almost like we had a difficult COVID time 6 months earlier than everyone else. So by the time COVID hit 6 months later, we had so much resilience in the business. It enabled us to have an astonishing 2 years of growth during COVID.
So the cycle of learning for you then is what? So it seems that every time there's a change, there's a bit of a pain point. And is it that actually those pain points are an indication that you're moving forward? Either something has to dramatically change.
Yeah, I mean, having the right people in the business, that was the main difference between 2019 and 2014, for sure.
Okay, so you had a very good COVID. Where are you with the business now?
So, well, we've tripled since that August 2019 time. So we're 3 times bigger, got a lot more people working for us. We've opened a retail business with a restaurant alongside. And yeah, I mean, it's the happiest, the last 3 years have been the happiest I've ever been in business, mainly because obviously things are going well, but we know that we're making more of a difference in the world. The retail side of the business has helped us express our values a lot more. In a B2B business, it's all about what goes on under the surface. Obviously, with real customers, you have to express yourselves a lot more, and that's been really good for the whole business for us to understand ourselves, if you like. So when we recruited people for Flourish, the retail business, we're much, much better at articulating what we're about as a business. So I was concerned, not worried. I was concerned, would we get the right people? Because we're pretty much doubling the people in the business. Could we attract the right people? And we did. I mean, it helps that a lot more younger people work there, and they're absolutely less about coming to work for money and more about coming to work to make a difference. So, yeah, it's going stunningly well, and I'm happier than I've ever been. I hope. Well, I know they are, because we have some great results on doing those anonymous surveys of, do you enjoy coming to work? And 90-something% say yes. So that's probably my main purpose now, is to.
Well, you see, what I think is
atmosphere.
interesting is that mine is a retail business where you're dealing with actual customers. When you're dealing with actual customers, you are able to create relationships.
Yes.
And it seems like everything that's important to you is these relationships. And therefore, there's nothing more heartening than actually people coming in. And I mean, I'm the taxi here, and I was telling the guy that I'm a black farmer, and he was going amazingly about how he loved these sausages, how it changed his life. And so it gives you a good feeling to know that actually real people out there, actually you're making a difference to their sort of life.
And to some extent we get that with the people who run the shops we supply, yes. But you're right, there's a lot more touchy-feely side of it with real consumers eating food, that they can see the chefs working in the kitchen and all that stuff. So,
okay. Yeah. So I want you, because we're coming up to our time in a minute, but I want you to give me, anybody listening to this who want to do their own thing, what advice would you give them?
Well, the number one is to go with your gut and to try and...
You see, I don't want to throw that line away, because a lot of people use that line. What does that mean to you?
I think it means sometimes not listening to other people, which is what we've talked about.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people I call them, in the world, who say to us, either actually say to us, or this subconscious thought we have in ourselves of, we should do this, we should do that, we should pay the mortgage, blah, blah, blah. Is that what you're really going to enjoy doing? And that's the key, I think. Doing something that you love, and generally, if you love it, you're good at it, that's when it works. And a lot of people do things they think they ought to do, rather than doing something they really love. And that is deep within us somewhere. For some people, they will know already. Some people might need to think back a bit of like what we've done today, and think back to their childhood and what was it I really loved back then? Well, don't hold back. Do it now. So
I subscribe to the theory that at the I think, a child before the age of 3 or 4, you go into a classroom with the kids and say, who's the best football player? They'll all put their hands up. By the time they're about 7, they'll point to someone, because they've already been conditioned to find their place. They have
some self-awareness.
Yeah. And I just think that what you've got to do, in a sense, is, in order to be entrepreneur, is to do what you've done and what I've done, which is somehow break away from those chains of expectations of others.
Yeah, and some of that's happened by accident. It's not all by design, but when you're in one of those accidental situations, there's a sense, I know I'm in the right place right now. I don't know if you ever have that feeling.
Oh, yes, but for me, because I couldn't do anything else.
Yeah.
So that's why you're in the right place. It feels good. And there's no evidence for it. You see, one of the things I find it's quite difficult is, in this age we live in, where everything is evidence-based, people make big, important...
And we haven't learnt to trust our intuition, the right side of the brain. So because of the way we're brought up, educated, often the way our parents are, everything is far too logical.
Yeah.
There is a place for logic, but we neglected the intuitive side of our brain, and that's really what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the gut. And actually, the gut is they now know there are nerve fibers, bits of the brain are actually in our gut, so it's not a throwaway line.
Exactly.
Anymore.
Now, for me, I've always trusted my gut, because when I went to school, I did very badly. I'm dyslexic. So very early on, I knew I didn't have the brain power, or the perceived brain power you need to function in sort of society. So the only thing that I did have was my gut. And so therefore, I've been friends with my gut for a very, very long time. And therefore, if I don't feel it, I don't do it.
Yeah.
And so I will use rational logic in terms of figuring out what's
Yes.
going on, but that's not the basis.
And
of
I've
how
had to learn to be friends with my guts. I think a lot of my education was suppressing that.
Exactly.
And over the last probably 10 years, I've learnt to listen to my gut a lot more than I did prior to that.
Okay, because education, especially the higher the education, fucks people up.
Absolutely couldn't agree more with that.
You know, because they go, they have fantastic education. They then leave with a fantastic expectation of life, and you find out.
We don't need to teach people facts anymore, do we? We've got Google for that.
Yeah.
Teach people how to live and teach them how to be creative and trust the intuitive parts of themselves, and we'd end up with a much more educated group.
I think, and what I tell you, one of the things that I do worry about is that this generation is losing people's skills. Because this whole thing about trusting your gut is that a little, your eyebrow movement, a little thing is giving you an indication about how somebody's feeling.
Yeah.
Everybody now does everything on text or emails.
Yeah.
So all the instincts in terms of reading human beings, they're losing those skills because actually they think that actually, because something I always say to people, something written down has a totally different meaning to a conversation.
And the same with these conversations. I mean, I've done a lot of podcasts, mainly on Zoom,
Yeah.
and you have a much better conversation when I'm sitting in the same room as you like this.
And you can sort of actually,
Exactly.
feel each other.
I mean, Zoom's great for reducing carbon and everything, but it'll never replace people-to-people relationship and contacts.
And I believe the people who actually grasp that will make a fortune in future. And I think people are going to start employing 60 and 70-year-olds to remind young kids what it's like to interact with real people. Because, all these dating they're doing on Tinder and all that sort of stuff, you can understand why they're struggling in relationships. Because if that's the only way you communicate, and then the first time you meet them in real life, you just don't have the skills.
Well, all the confidence,
All
like
the confidence.
we talked about earlier.
To also read them. And Paul, thank you very, very much. And it's been a great first one, actually.
Okay,
Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I did.
You have been listening to myself, Wilfred Emmanuel Jones, or better known as the Black Farmer. This was the Success is Not Normal podcast. Stay tuned for the next week's episode.